Welcome to the Burgundy Network podcast mini-series Drafting Burgundy. I'm Josh Taylor, your host, joined by Adam Aniba, and a special guest today from the Draft Network. We have Jordan Reid, senior draft analyst. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Josh, Adam, thank you guys for being on. It's a pleasure. Ready to talk some Washington football team with you guys. So excited to be here.
I saw that you actually were on Team 980 the other day talking about Ohio State quarterbacks. How'd that go?
Yeah, it was interesting just because, you get a lot of people, they immediately see a quarterback from Ohio State and they immediately dismiss them. So that was a bit of a journey, but it's always fun just talking draft stuff and stuff like that in general.
Yeah, me and Adam talked about Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields on the last episode. And like I told you, today we're going to be talking about two guys that could possibly be in Washington. Trey Lance, who is probably one of the more complicated guys to study, as you can probably back us up on that. And then your second biggest riser in the draft is Zach Wilson. So the hype train's real. I've been pushing the Zach Wilson train to Washington as hard as I can. But starting with Trey Lance, I want to break him down first. Redshirt sophomore, 6'3", 224 from North Dakota State. I'm sure you watched the only game of the season against Central Arkansas. I wanted to talk about that first because he obviously had this huge season, 2019. I'd say it's safe to say he was the unanimous number 3 quarterback in the draft before this season started. Did you have him at number 3, or did you have him a little bit back before that game?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I don't think that game should really move the needle for anybody just because it's such a small sample size and everybody's going to have their opinions about the game. Everybody's going to see what they want to see from that game. But yes, it is a small sample size, but I think it should go off of what he showed in the 16 games as a redshirt freshman, just because that's the bigger sample size that we have of him. But I would say the one thing that really isn't working in Trey Lance's favor is that just a small sample size. And the only time we've seen guys with that small a sample size go on to be first-round selections, it's kind of been a mixed bag, and the names are Cam Newton, Mark Sanchez, Mitchell Trubisky, and a guy that you guys are familiar with, and Dwayne Haskins. So as you can see, it's a very, very mixed sample size as far as with those guys and how their careers turned out. So Trey Lance is going to be a first-round pick, but it's going to be extremely risky for the team that takes him. And he has all the traits that you're looking for at the position. It's just a matter of you just want to see a little bit more from a sample size standpoint. And one thing that I say that I always wanted to see from Trey Lance is that we didn't ever get to see him face any type of adversity. And I think that's big for a quarterback. And if you think about Justin Fields last week or 2 weeks ago against Indiana, he had one of the worst games of his career. But in the third and the fourth quarter, I thought he bounced back really nicely. And that really was the first time that we saw him face any type of adversity since the Clemson game in the national championship playoff semifinals a year ago. So little things like that are what scouts look for. But we never got to see that from Trey Lance. And he did face some adversity in the Central Arkansas game. That was the first game where he threw an interception in his entire career. So those are only the small semblances of adversity that we've seen, but you just want to see a little bit more just because we really don't have a huge sample size on him, and that is a little bit risky, just like the names that we talked about a little bit earlier.
Jordan, let me ask you, with the way the combine is going to be situated, I'm sure you might have heard more than we have. Don't you think with him, this is probably going to be one of the biggest combines for all the quarterbacks? Because I think what we've seen from all the quarterbacks, I think we have a good idea as far as the top 5, what they can do, maybe how they'll transition. But Lance is a guy that I just continue to watch, and I think that he needs to be with a team that possibly has a veteran where they can be patient and possibly maybe tailor something to him. Do you think that that's something that's, relevant for him, or do you think he's just a guy that could, maybe come in right away and be efficient, have not to put him in a Lamar Jackson box, but, in a situation where a team maybe schemes a certain offense for him?
Yeah, I'm right there with you as far as your former statement, and that he needs to go somewhere where he can sit for a year just because he is so raw coming out, and then the sample size is so small. He hasn't really been exposed to a whole bunch, and, playing the FCS competition as well, it's going to be a huge bump up for him as far as speed of the game, as fast as he has to process things, and just the avalanche of information that he's going to face in the NFL game. And, the staff there did a really good job of coaching him up. And if you watch videos of him, you hear him speak. You hear him talk about the game. He's very knowledgeable as far as protections, the high routes, where to go with the ball, and all of that stuff. So it's not a situation of where he's kind of in a Justin Fields situation of where we all know that offense is really good for scheming guys wide open. I think he's a little bit more as far as there's a little bit more placed on his plate as far as what he has to do from a pre-snap and post-snap standpoint. So he is a very intelligent individual. I haven't met him personally or anything like that, but I do look forward to asking him some questions at the combine, and NFL teams they're gonna ask him a whole bunch of or a lot of questions as well, just because the sample size is so small, and then they're gonna break down those small sample sizes as far as those small semblances of adversity that he did face, where he did have some turnovers or where he fumbled the ball, or those instances where he did throw some interceptions in the Central Arkansas game, just to see what he says and how quickly he can process the things that they're trying to get from him.
Right. Now, you said the sample sizes and talked about that. One thing that I really talked about with Haskins was just lack of experience. You can't really just make experience and reps and reading defenses and just going through each play over and over. And I actually wrote down Mitch Trubisky, too, as the other guy that I referenced to a lot for that. You see how much of a jump Joe Burrow made from that was a 2018 season to LSU, which was, mediocre, and then just a historic jump in 2019. How much do you really weigh experience when you're, scouting out these guys for going to certain teams and stuff? Personally, for you, is it have a lot of weight to it? Because like I said, you can't really just make up experience. You just have to go out and do it year in and year out.
I think it's a case-by-case basis, honestly. And then where you're talking about a guy like a Cam Newton, who only played 1 year of college football, but Cam was still relatively raw at the position. But the natural traits were so good, you knew eventually the light was going to turn on for him just because of how good the physical traits are for him. Now, I don't think any of these guys are even in the same tier as Cam Newton as far as the athlete that he was and just the superstar potential that he did have when he was coming out in 2011, I believe it was. I think these guys are much more naturally gifted as far as passers, but the game has changed since then, and that was pretty much 10 years ago. So that small sample size is something that is going to scare a lot of people just because, like you said, there's no better teacher than experience. And a lot of people don't realize that Joe Burrow played the last half of the 2018 season, and he played okay for the most part.
Yeah.
The bowl game against Central Florida during his big year prior to 2019 was where the light really started to turn on for him. But nobody knew he was going to have the 2019 season that he did. But he took a big hit in that Central Florida bowl game against Central Florida, and it's like he just turned into another person after that, and he turned into Superman for LSU. So sample size is something that is big for quarterbacks. Now, I don't think there's like a magic number or anything like that. I think 2 years of experience is usually good for quarterbacks just because, like the names I named before, all those guys only had 15 career starts at a maximum. And then Trey Lance, I think he's played 17 career games. So he's hovering right around that number. It's just, if you throw him in right away, I just think it's not going to be good for him. I don't think it's going to end good for him. So he just needs to go somewhere where he can learn the game. He can just sit back and just digest the information from an experienced veteran. I think that would really help him starting probably by his second year.
Yeah, as a former quarterback yourself, I was really interested to hear your option on that, or your opinion on that. Just the experience, just reading defenses, like you said, year in, year out, learning more stuff and just soaking up from your coaches and teammates. But yeah, that's what I've been saying with Trey Lance. I think if he comes here to Washington, as we saw with Haskins, I don't know if we have time for someone like that. Like, yes, he would sit on the bench. We do have Alex Smith, who's looked better than expected. But he needs to go somewhere, kind of like what Pat Mahomes did, into a team ready to succeed, just missing that one quarterback possibly. Speaking of NFL quarterbacks, if you had to comp this guy, now here's an interesting thing. Passing-wise, because him running the ball is a different breed in my opinion. He kind of looks like an Andrew Luck, lowering his shoulder, not afraid to get hit. But if you had to comp Trey Lance to anyone in the NFL right now, as raw as he is, who would you say he reminds you of?
Now, I will say this. When I use comparisons, it's just from a trait standpoint. It's not just projecting for what he's eventually going to turn into. And I think that's kind of the fine line that a lot of people get confused, and you throw a name out there and they expect them to immediately be that person. So I just wanted to say that.
A little disclaimer.
Yeah. But when I was just writing up a scouting report this summer, I wrote down Dak Prescott. That was a player that he really reminded me of a lot as far as just the build. They had that similar physique, about 6'3". Both of them are hovering around 230 pounds. But I think Trey Lance is much more of a natural passer than Dak was coming out. But as far as runners, they're very tough as runners. And I think that's one thing that Trey Lance is going to have to learn. Like, he just does not slide. He doesn't believe in sliding. He wants to take those big hits. So I think that's something that he's going to have to learn. And Dak was in a similar situation of where Dak wasn't as naturally gifted as a passer, but he was in that run-heavy type offense at Mississippi State to where he really sat behind Romo for a year, I believe it was. And then he learned how to be a passer, sitting behind an experienced veteran and a very accomplished player like Tony Romo. But I think Trey Lance is very similar stylistically to him as far as from a body structure standpoint, the way they throw the ball, how well they process information, and then them not necessarily being ready stepping into year one. But I think year two, year three, I think that really could benefit him. And it wouldn't surprise me if he goes on to have maybe not similar success as Dak Prescott or how good he has turned out to be, but it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up being, a top 15 type starter in the NFL.
Yeah, and you look at the stats for Trey Lance, it's hard to find anything wrong with them. Some people will point out the comp percentage only at 66.9% in 2019. To me, when you watch him actually play, it doesn't feel like that. Like there was some drops, there was some, it's just not the nature of the game. But having 28 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, it's hard to find a knock on a guy like that. But if you had to come out and say this is the one thing that he really needs to work on, translating to the NFL, what would be your one knock on him as of today?
I would say getting to his third and fourth option on his progression. And what happens is the North Dakota State offense, they run a lot of play action. So there's a lot of things that's really schemed open for him right away, just because whenever you're running so much play action and you're whenever you're running so much heavy run game like they do, and then feed off the play action off of that, you get those shots to the tight ends that are wide open down the middle of the field. So he's been a beneficiary of guys being really wide open off of that play action type scheme after they've been running the ball so much. And I thought they held his hand a little bit early on, which is expected. A guy that's a redshirt freshman making his first few starts. But as the year went along, you start to see them open up the game a little bit more for him. And I thought they did that in the Central Arkansas game as well. So I think progression-based reads as far as getting to, his 1, 2, 3, and then eventually fourth or fifth option to his running back, to his check down. I think that's something that he needs to do a little bit more cleanly. But it was just a matter of them kind of babying him a little bit. Just like I said, it is expected. The guy was a redshirt freshman. They're not going to hand over the full reins to him early on just because he was so young. But I think he has the potential to do it. But it's just something that he's going to have to clean up and then just get that experience as he goes along and then he becomes a pro. So just seeing the field a little bit more cleanly and, getting to his third, fourth, and fifth read on the progression and throwing the ball accurately, I think that's something that needs to clean up a little bit.
Yeah, and it seemed like in the Central Arkansas game, they didn't really call any run design plays until like 4 minutes left in the second quarter. So it really had to feel like they wanted him to get that experience, just throwing the ball, like you said, making reads, just seeing how he's progressing, passing-wise, because they know he's going to run that rock regardless. Like you said, he's not afraid to get hit, anything like that. But I was really just looking at that game. I rewatched it today and a couple other games in the 2019 season. Just how he does throw the ball and how accurate he is on those deep passes. There's a couple plays where he throws it. It's literally as hard as a catch for a wide receiver, and he just drops it right in the basket. Deep pass wise, do you see that translating to the NFL, or how hard is that for a quarterback going from, I hate to say, the competition of like North Dakota State, and then you're going up against some of these top-notch guys in the NFL? Does it translate well, or is that something that some quarterbacks just have trouble with?
Yeah, I mean, touch is something that is just a naturally born gift, just like accuracy. I think it's something you can't teach. And it's kind of like being a golfer. When you're swinging on a fairway, you're trying to hit it on the green, and then sometimes it goes in the rough, or you just completely overswing it sometimes. So I think touch is something that does translate. Accuracy is also something that does translate as well. And it's just one of those traits that either you have it or you don't. And it's kind of one of those things that's really hard to explain, just because it's just like an innate ability of you just to, whenever the ball's coming off your fingertips, just to put enough arm strength on it and just estimate where the receiver is going to end up. But the Youngstown State game was one that he showed some tremendous accuracy in. I think that was one of the better games of his redshirt freshman season. And you just see the deep shots all over the field. You see him running the ball every which way as well. So I think as the two traits that you mentioned, the touch and the accuracy, I think those are two things that are going to translate really well for him on the next level.
Yeah, we hear people talk about, schools, and we see like Carson Wentz on a decline. Like, I don't know, he goes to North Dakota State. I don't really know if I want to recruit somebody on that. And we actually had a guy ask in similar question, just really depending on like if you're scouting someone from a certain school. He said, how much does each program really factor into scouting each player? Do you kind of shy away? You talked about it with Ohio State. But I'll take it another step further, going from like D1 to D2 or even D3. Does it really hold weight to you because he doesn't have that competition? Or are you like, look, Jerry Rice balled out with the best of them in the NFL, and he went to, Mississippi Valley State? Like, competition in college doesn't really matter to you? Or how do you feel about that as a evaluator?
Yeah, so I had 5 years of experience as a Division I college coach, so I can definitely speak on both sides of the spectrum of this. And this is one of the situations where you just have to separate the player and just evaluate the traits. And one of the first things you learn when you become a scout is just scout the player, not the helmet decal. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people made with Patrick Mahomes, just because if you think of all the quarterbacks that came out of Texas Tech prior to him, a lot of people dismissed Patrick Mahomes off that single entity. And that was one of the biggest reasons why they missed on him. And I think this is another situation that's going to happen to Justin Fields as well. There's going to be a lot of people that dismiss him just because he's an Ohio State quarterback. And I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago of where how he's just so much different than a lot of those other guys that they have had in the past. And what I mean by that is Ohio State really tried to mold athletes into quarterbacks. And you think about the guys like a Terrell Pryor, a Braxton Miller, JT Barrett. They had all these athletic guys that they were trying to mold into playing a quarterback. And Justin Fields is completely different. He's just so much more polished as a passer. So whenever you're talking about these small school guys as well, I mean, I've coached against guys like Darius Leonard, Tariq Cohen, and these guys just dominated the FCS level, and stuff like that translates if you just look at the traits. And I think you have to separate them from the competition. And as a scout, it really is a gift that you have to have in order to just scout the player and just eliminate them from the surroundings and just figure out how good they are. So competition shouldn't really matter. It's just a matter of just scouting the player, not the helmet decal, and just scout their traits as a whole.
Yeah, I'm sure Adam will agree with you. He specializes in small schools. He had Jeremy Chin way early last year, and I was like, who's this guy? Like, I guess I'll check him out. It's, the school doesn't matter. And I'm sure, I went to Coastal Carolina. We'll talk a little bit about that later with Zach Wilson. But I saw you added some guys to your list, certain edge over there in Conway, South Carolina. That's really impressing people. But I agree. Don't take a look at the school. Look at the player. Perfect. Like I said, Jerry Rice, Randy Moss went to Marshall. You can't just base it off of that. If you're one of the guys that wrote off Pat Mahomes because of what school he went to, you're regretting that pretty much every day of your life right now, Chicago Bears. But another question I had for you. Washington. You had him on your mock draft. This was back in November 12th. So, we're in a little bit better position to win the East. We might be picking around 19 now. We're not tanking for whoever right now currently. So you had us picking 5th, and you had us taking Trey Lance. Now my question for you is, 1, is he a good fit in Washington? And second, if you're taking a look at it, second year coach with Ron Rivera and the offense that we run, is the risk worth the reward taking him that high? Because people are going to be like, look, we took Haskins at 15. That project looks like it's over. Here we go again. I put out a tweet last night about if we draft Trey Lance, what's your reaction? I got a lot of junk. A lot of people didn't like it. So I was curious, what was your thoughts behind that and sending Trey to Washington at number 5?
Well, we talk about the sample size a lot. And if you think about the one quarterback that Ron Rivera had when he was in Carolina, he was in a similar situation with Cam Newton. And, Ron isn't scared to take risk on guys, especially at the quarterback position. Now, he wasn't there when Haskins was selected. That was more of a Dan Snyder pick from my understanding. But, I mean, Cam was the only quarterback that he seriously had. So he's used to molding that young, raw guy with a lot of potential. And then you already have Alex Smith in the building, which is great for Trey Lance. You already have that guy that he can be the heir apparent to. And I'm not saying Trey Lance is going to end up like a Patrick Mahomes, but he's in a similar situation as far as being an understudy for a year. And maybe if they're out of contention later on in the year, he maybe starts a couple games during the latter half of the year. I think that would be best for him. But I think it'll be a really good situation for him. But I think the biggest thing that Washington has to do this year, I think this entire offseason has to revolve around the offense, just because they don't have any weapons on the perimeter outside of Terry McLaurin.
Nope.
I mean, the weapons are very scarce outside of him. So I would love to see him have a receiver. I think they have an offensive tackle situation that they need to figure out, just because I don't know what they're going to do with Sadiq Charles, and I know he's on IR for the year, but I don't see him as a long-term answer as a left tackle. I think they're probably going to try to slide him inside a little bit. I think that would be better for his career outlook. Running back is figured out with Antonio Gibson. I think he's a spectacular player who's only getting better as the year goes along. So I wouldn't even be mad if they double dipped at receiver as well. And I know they took some guys last year, but I wouldn't be mad at all if they take 2 guys early on in the first 4 rounds. I wouldn't be mad at all at that. So, but nothing matters until you get the quarterback position figured out. We know Haskins is probably going to be traded in the offseason. I don't see a situation of where he even steps on the field again for Washington unless Alex Smith gets hurt or anything like that. I just think it's just best for both sides. I don't think the relationship is going to be healed there just because of what happened this year. So, they got to figure out the quarterback situation. And I think this entire offseason needs to revolve around the offense. The Brandon Scherf decision, they have a decision that they need to make with him, whether they want to pay him or let him walk. So it's a big offseason for Ron Rivera, and I can't wait to see what they do. But I think it needs to be offensive-centric for the most part.
I was glad you mentioned Alex Smith, Jordan. Do you really think, I guess everything aside with the great comeback story, do you really think, even with an offseason upgraded on the offensive line, everything that they need to do, that this would be a situation where a young quarterback, a lot of people have talked about, being behind Alex Smith and learning, but don't you think at the same time a young quarterback is really going to be thrown into a situation where if Alex Smith takes that wrong hit, something goes the wrong way, that they could be thrown into the fire? I'm a little ahead of ourselves here, but would you say Zach Wilson or Trey Lance would be more prepared to jump into that situation? Of course, Lance has, I understand, maybe less career games, but who do you think would be probably more prepared to be in that situation?
It's a situation where we honestly don't know, Adam, just because we don't know either one of those guys and how they're going to turn out as far as who's going to be ready, who's going to be not. Just like Justin Herbert, nobody really expected him to be as good as he has been throughout this season. So you really don't know how these guys are going to turn out until you see him on the field. And Joe Burrow was ready from day one. Justin Herbert, I think he would have been ready from day one, even if Tyrod Taylor didn't start the year. So it's just a case-by-case basis of you really don't know who's ready until they step on the field and they're out there throwing the ball and see how quickly they process the speed of the game. But I'm a big Zach Wilson fan. I have him ranked ahead of Trey Lance right now, and I think the stock is only going to get better as the year goes along. Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me if that kid ends up being the number 2 pick.
Yeah. So let's jump into it.
I kind of segued, I guess.
This is the guy we've been waiting to talk about. But Trey Lance, definitely a possibility coming to Washington. His brother just committed to North Dakota State today, so the Lance train's keeping going. So no worries there. But let's talk about it. Zach Wilson, second biggest riser, second to Terrace Marshall, wide receiver from LSU, 6'3", 210, junior, BYU. Right off the gate, I'm going to ask you, are you concerned at all about his 210 frame and his mass going into the NFL?
It's a fair concern. And, a guy that had shoulder surgery this offseason, also he had surgery on his hand as well, on his thumb, trying to make a tackle last season as well. So the first thing that you notice, and the first thing that I actually wrote up in my scouting report about him, I said, if you were a team captain and you were playing a pickup basketball game, Zach Wilson would probably be one of the last guys that you would pick just based off of what his body structure looks like. And he's listed at 6'3", I believe 205, but it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up at 200 pounds. That wouldn't surprise me at all. He kind of has that Derek Carr-like build. I think that's probably a similar frame as far as what he is going into the league. But, he has the electric arm that you're looking for, and you wouldn't even be able to tell that he had shoulder surgery on his throwing shoulder during the offseason. I was surprised when I found that out going into his evaluation this summer and just seeing how well the ball came off of his hands. But it's just one of those situations where you really don't know who's going to be that surprise quarterback prospect during the year. And Joe Burrow was that guy last year. And it's just one of those things you can't predict. And Zach Wilson has been that guy this year. But the best thing about Wilson is that he has those translatable traits that you look for. He can throw from those funky arm angles. He sees the field really well. The ball is a flick of the wrist. The ball just comes out of his hand so violently. And I think he has enough mobility to get out of harm's way. Now, he's not a guy that's going to consistently make people miss or be super elusive, but I think he definitely can get out of harm's way from some of those athletic defensive linemen throughout the league. But I think he has a lot of translatable traits that transition over to being a big-time hit on the next level.
Yeah, the one thing I wrote down about him, besides the ridiculous throw factor, it's funny because I was writing down these notes today, and I just instantly thought of the Mahomes video where he's just flicking that tissue around. I'm like, that's something that Wilson needs to start doing because, with those angles and everything he does, that's absolutely got Zach Wilson written all over it. But one thing, his favorite throw to me, I don't know what you call it as a quarterback, but I call them like the in stride throws. We saw Haskins do it a lot in the offseason. Everyone talked about it at practices and stuff. But just he rolls out, makes a play when the pocket collapses, and he can easily just flick his wrist, like you said, throw it 40 yards down the field without even having his feet planted. Do you think that, besides Mahomes, who obviously does it perfect to a T, how hard is it to keep up with that? And as dangerous as it could be going to the NFL, does that concern you at all?
Not at all.
Not setting your feet.
Not at all. And I think it's kind of like a necessity in today's league. And if you're not mobile at the quarterback position, I think I mean, it's pretty much a death sentence nowadays. And I think the 2018 class is a great carbon copy and a testament to that. And if you think about other quarterbacks that have succeeded from the class, they have some semblance of mobility. When you're talking about Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold, Lamar Jackson, and some of the other guys that came out in this class, the one guy that didn't succeed was Josh Rosen. And he was the one guy that wasn't mobile out of the group. And I know he's been in some unfair situations, but his biggest bugaboo was always that he couldn't get outside the pocket and create off script. And off script creation is something that I think is a requirement for quarterbacks nowadays. And those quarterbacks that aren't able to do it consistently, that's always a huge worry with me, just because of the discrepancy between offensive and defensive line talent, and the athleticism between the two is only getting better year in and year out. The difference between the two is only getting greater year in and year out. So you have to have these athletic types that are coming into the league. And if you think about the guys already, Tua Tagovailoa, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, all those guys are very athletic and they're very mobile as well, to where they can get out of harm's way. And that was unfortunate what happened to Joe Burrow, but we know how electric he can be inside and outside the pocket, what he can create. So I think that's definitely working in Zach Wilson's favor, but also he's a great thrower on the run. And I think that's something that is really hard for defensive coordinators to game plan against, just because you can't simulate a guy getting outside of the pocket and just throwing the ball and chucking it all over the yard. And I think that's one of the biggest assets of a guy like a Patrick Mahomes, just because no matter how much you game plan and you go over these plays in practice, you can't imitate him rolling outside the pocket and throwing the ball 60 yards down the field. That's just something that you can't imitate, and you can't prepare for stuff like that. And I think that's something that works in Wilson's favor for sure.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jordan. It's a really basic question, but it's something that I've been dealing with social media a lot. Anytime we've discussed, especially Zach Wilson, what would you say to the people out there, the fans, especially in Washington, that are just done with the quarterback situation, that say, Zach Wilson is just more hype. He's like the Baker Mayfield coming out, and he's just another prospect that's a flash in the pan that, people fell in love with. As a fellow evaluator, someone that spent a lot of time, and especially with the quarterback position, what would you say to that as far as, I know it's an early process, but as far as his game translating to the next level?
Yeah, and I see it all the time with BYU playing a soft schedule, and they're not playing a lot of competition. But, I mean, Zach Wilson, he's not the athletic director. He doesn't make the schedule. He can't schedule Power 5 opponents. And I would like to see them play against Washington, and they have a big game against Coastal Carolina this weekend. I think that's going to be a really good test for him, and I'm hoping BYU can make it in a New Year's Six bowl game so we can see him play against a legitimate defense. Hopefully, but I mean, he can't control that. All he can do, he can just go out there and make good throws, and he's constantly killing it week in and week out. He can't control who he plays, and like I say, good throws are good throws. No matter if you're in the backyard playing catch with him, or if he's out there making throws against Texas State or UTSA or whoever they're playing that week. So all you can do is just evaluate what he puts on tape, and the traits that he has put on tape have been absolutely phenomenal. And those throws that he had made, they absolutely translate to the next level. So good throws are good throws. That's what I would say to that.
Yeah, I remember right before the season, we're both Alabama fans, and as soon as the whole USC dropped out, there was rumors that BYU was going to be who we played. And like looking back at it now, it's like, why did we miss out on the opportunity? But I thought about that the other day too. Like whichever bowl game they go to, I think they'll run through Coastal. I think they'll go undefeated. I know it's my former college at Coastal, but I'm sorry, guys. But still, I think they'll be undefeated to finish the season. That game, whoever they play, is going to be the most anticipated game of the season. Probably more than the playoffs, even if they don't make the playoffs. Like, that's going to be the must-game watch because it's going to be Zach Wilson versus either Georgia or Ohio State, whoever they play. Like, we deserve that. I think we deserve to see that.
And it'll probably be our last chance to see him before he becomes a professional as well. And I think if he plays well in that game, if they play in a New Year's Six game, I mean, that would stamp his resume as definitely being a top 5 pick.
So I wanted to ask you, because I wrote down a comp for him, but it's going to be someone you probably don't expect. I just kept watching him play, and he talked about the quick release, and he just, that flick of that wrist and how fast he gets the ball out. It reminded me of Steph Curry. Just how he plays on offense and just how he just shoots the three. Zach Wilson would just take the ball and I want to know his exact release time. It's probably 2.1. It's ridiculous. But the flick of the wrist, how fast he gets it out, and just with ease and how far it goes. If you had to pick a comp for him in the NFL, who would you pick?
So I was talking to my good buddy Lance Zierlein at NFL Network, and he said, "Go read my scouting report on Derek Carr." And who does it remind you of? And so I'm looking at the scouting report. It said, beat up on Mountain West competition, but didn't play well when he stepped up against upper level competition. Has a small but brittle frame. He suffered some injuries. And then the one difference between the two was that he was reluctant to go downfield. So I texted him back and I said, "You're right. He's aggressive Derek Carr." I think that's a really good comp for him as far as I think he has that similar body type as far as not an overly big type of guy, but he has a really, really strong arm. But I think the difference between him and Derek Carr is that he's very, very aggressive with going down the field. And like you said, he just makes some of those half-court shots he makes it look so easy. So I think aggressive Derek Carr is kind of the comp that I would use for him just from a body type standpoint. And maybe not necessarily a playing style, but just let's just say Derek Carr just somehow turned into an aggressive type player. Let's say Derek Carr every time they play against the Kansas City Chiefs, just because that's like the only time
I'll take that
he looks down the field. So I think that would be a fair comparison for Zach Wilson.
I would take that all day long. I was trying to find cons for him because honestly, it's hard. I try to put my bias aside. I texted Adam before the first game of BYU. I was like, "Yo, watch this Zach Wilson guy. He's gonna kill it this season." I've been pushing that hype train. I've been trying to find a con. There really isn't one. The only thing that I've really seen people talk about is he can be quote unquote too cute with his passes and sometimes put his wide receivers in danger. And the guy that said it is like a former quarterback, and he said it's something that sticks with people. Would you say that's true or false? Like throwing ill-advised passes or dangerous passes to your wide receivers or tight end. Does that exist? Is that even a thing? Because that just sounded off to me.
Well, I mean, that's just something that comes with this playing style. And you get different variances of guys that, and I write this up actually in all my scouting reports. I actually have a category that's just called daredevil mentality. And Josh Allen, I mean, that's a guy that has that notch turned all the way up. But then you think about a guy like a Teddy Bridgewater or Alex Smith that you guys are very familiar with. They just don't have that daredevil mentality. They're just caretakers of the football. So I think that daredevil mentality is just something that comes with Zach Wilson and is a bit Jekyll and Hyde, and that's just something that you're going to get with him. But I like those types of quarterbacks just because that's how you generate those explosive plays as opposed to what I call a death by 1,000 paper cuts type of quarterback of where they just dink and dunk the ball down the field. But that's the only time you're going to get those highlight type plays of, those big time explosive plays. So I think Zach Wilson would be a really good fit for the Washington football team, but you just have to understand there's going to be some throws that just make you go like, man, what the hell was he doing right there? But he's going to come back maybe that next drive and throw a 70-yard bomb. So that's just the Jekyll and Hyde that you get with him.
Yeah, you gotta weigh out the risk and the reward, or do you want, no offense, Alex Smith, but do you want 10 checkdowns in a row that could possibly go for a 7-yard burst with J.D. McKissick or Gibson? So definitely agree on that. One thing with him that we talked about, you can throw these crazy throws. How hard is it to evaluate a guy going into college to the NFL to where they can just turn into multiple turnovers? You talked about like Josh Allen, his first season threw a lot of interceptions. He got better. Pat Mahomes didn't really ever have a interception problem. He was just, like I said, the daredevil. He just threw it and it didn't usually get picked off. He took care of the ball pretty well his first season. How hard is it to evaluate? Like, is he going to be a Josh Allen first year, or is he going to be a Mahomes kind of guy with his aggressiveness, like you say, or just throwing the ball downfield?
I think it's one of those situations where it's just a case-by-case basis, honestly, guys. And like I said, I keep saying this, you really don't know how these guys are going to translate to the next level. And I mean, you just got to hope it turns out for the best, just because there's no formula to evaluating quarterbacks. And I mean, we've seen guys like a Russell Wilson turn out that I wouldn't say nobody didn't expect him to turn out the way he did, but some people did. But there's just no proven recipe to where I take a Trevor Lawrence and he turns out to be a Hall of Famer. Like, I love Trevor. I think he's going to be a phenomenal pro, but I mean, it's not written in ink that he's going to be what everybody expects him to be. There's no written formula and there's no guaranteed success with no matter who you take. So I think it's just a case-by-case basis, and you just have to hope and pray that you land the right guy.
I think, Jordan, one thing I wanted to ask you is I've seen from a lot of evaluators is his leadership ability. Of course, we talk about Rivera and something that they're really missing. I think the Alex Smith story has kind of propelled him to that kind of position. I don't know if he would be in that scenario if the injury never happened. But with someone like Wilson who can come in, work behind Alex Smith, do you think he's somebody that can mesh well? I know, again, it's projection, but somebody that can mesh well with Rivera and, what Turner's looking to do as far as the offense, even though, like you said, they need weapons. But do you think that would be a situation where he can mesh well?
Yeah, because they're completely different quarterbacks. Like, how do you learn from a guy who plays opposite the way you do?
Right.
Yeah, I think once he makes that first 70-yard bomb down the field, I think that'll change their mindset a lot. Just because I don't think the Washington offense, outside of Terry McLaurin, I just don't think they're super explosive right now. They just don't have the weapons to do that. But I think Zach Wilson is a guy that really can overcome some of those deficiencies that they do have. And you guys know that you're not going to be able to improve every position in the offseason, no matter what everybody wants from the fan base. Everybody's going to want them to sign a big-time receiver and then draft somebody else this year. That's just not going to happen. They're not going to be able to improve all the positions at the offensive line. And then they're not going to be able to get a formidable tight end either. And, Logan Thomas has played well, but I think he's better served probably as a number 2 as opposed to a bona fide number 1. So they're not going to be able to improve every position. But you have a guy like Zach Wilson that's going to be able to overcome some of those weapons that he may not have on the perimeter, just because I think he's a player that definitely can be a player that can be a catalyst of an offense, as opposed to a player that just really meshes and mixes in and is so predicated on his surroundings being so perfect to where he needs everything set up really well, which I think that's the type of quarterback that Alex Smith is. He needs everything to be perfect around him in order to see him at his top potential. And I don't think Zach Wilson is a guy like that. I think he's able to overcome some of the lack of weapons that they may have on the perimeter.
Yeah, because it seems like to me that right now, if you look at all the quarterbacks in the NFL, there's nobody that's kind of just, going along with the program. They're usually the leaders of the team or leaders of the offense. So I have to agree that if you're not going to come in and just kind of go with the flow, I don't really think you can be dominant in an NFL franchise. So again, that's what we keep going back and forth with Zach Wilson, with a lot of fans out there who think that, going quarterback again after Dwayne Haskins so soon is a mistake. But I guess what our discussion is not really if we should take him, is if he came to Washington, would it work? And I think, you've pretty much opened the book on, it's a long time to get from here to there. But I think he's definitely a good option, especially what Washington's looking for.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I think it could be a very similar situation to what we saw in Los Angeles with the Chargers. And, everybody came out and said, I can't believe Anthony Lynn is still backing Tyrod Taylor after Herbert had the first breakout game. I forgot who their opponent was, but he was just phenomenal in his first game when he came in relief duty when Tyrod got hurt. So I think it's a situation that could be similar to that, just because Tyrod is known as a locker room leader, a guy that everybody's going to believe in, but we know he's pretty much bumped his head on the ceiling of what he's going to be. And I think Alex Smith is in a very similar situation. And then you have a young guy behind him that has a lot of upside. And you saw Herbert come in and throw a 60-yard bomb. I think it was like against the Buccaneers or somebody like that. And everybody believed in him after that. So I think Zach Wilson could be in a similar situation. He goes out, he throws a 70-yard bomb at FedEx Field, and everybody goes crazy. So
everybody loves it. Yep.
It'll be all she wrote after that.
Now I have one last question, and then we had two last questions from our listeners. My last one. So say I'm all in on the Washington train. Say we win the NFC East. We pick at 19. I think we can all agree that Zach Wilson's not going to be there at 19. There's no way. But with only playing one game this season and there being such a deep draft, whether it's guys like Micah Parsons, Penny, the offensive line, wide receivers, probably the deepest wide receiver draft all time. Is there any chance a guy like Trey Lance can fall to that 19 spot?
I don't see it happen unless he just completely bombs the pre-draft process. Just listening to him speak and seeing how football savvy he is and how high his football IQ is, I don't see him making it outside the top 12 to 15. I think that's a fair range for him as far as where he goes. And then everybody knows he's going to light it up at the combine during the on-field drills just because of how cleanly he throws the ball. So unless he just completely bombs the pre-draft process or just does something unforeseen off the field, I don't see him making it to the 19th pick. So I think Washington's in a good situation though, where they just can take the best player available. And I wouldn't be surprised if they go offensive tackle. This is a very deep offensive tackle class. So there's going to be a lot of options for them inside that top 20 or top 25, wherever they do end up selecting. So offensive tackle definitely wouldn't surprise me at all.
So I'll just go ahead and write in Mac Jones in the second round. That's fine. That's fine with me. I'll take him. Roll Tide. And the two last questions I had, one of our listeners, Troy Smith, asked, with the QB carousel that's been going on in Washington, if you had to pick between the two, Lance and Wilson, which would be better options in Scott Turner's offense if Terry McLaurin is your top receiver going into next season?
I just like the potential of Wilson more than Lance right now, and just how well his traits just translate a little bit better to the league initially. I think he's a guy that can come in and have success right away just because you see all of the throws that he's making. And I know the competition isn't the best, but like I told you guys, good throws are good throws. And the things that he's doing right now definitely translate to the league. And their sample size is relatively the same for the most part. So sample size isn't really something that I can use against Trey Lance in this argument. But I just like the traits a little bit more than what Wilson does bring to the table right now than what Lance does.
I agree. Like I said, I'm all in on Zach Wilson. If we have to trade up, pull a Bears move, do what they did for Trubisky to get Zach Wilson, I'm all for it. Stamp of approval from me. Last question, my guy Ranger Teach asked us, outside of these two quarterbacks, who would be your dark horse option at quarterback in the draft for Washington? I'll say fit-wise.
I could see them, since they're so high on Alex Smith, I definitely could see them being high on Mac Jones. They could maybe trade up for him in the second round. And the thing that just scares me about Mac Jones is that he's just the type of quarterback that you get stuck in quarterback purgatory with. And what I mean by that is he's the Andy Dalton type, the Teddy Bridgewater type. He doesn't possess a lot of the upside that maybe some of these guys do, but Mac is supremely smart. He's not as mobile or as physically gifted as some of these guys are, but he comes from a big-time program that you know he's going to be able to come in right away and play right away. And I think he's an underrated deep thrower, right now, but he doesn't have that adequate enough arm strength. And I think his game is very similar to the Andy Dalton, the Alex Smith. He just doesn't have the adequate upside of some of these other guys, but it wouldn't surprise me if he goes on to be one of the better players in this draft, even though his upside isn't as great. But I think he could go in that 35 to 45 range as far as picks. I think that's a fair range for him.
Yeah, so taking wide receiver, offensive line in the first round, and then him possibly in the second, definitely an option. Me and Adam will be breaking down him and Kyle Trask with Matt Miller on the next episode. Looking forward to that as an Alabama fan. But Jordan, I know you've got a lot going on with the podcast, the Reid option. Tell us a little bit about that. I've been listening to your interviews with some of the top college players. What do you got coming up for us?
Yeah, so I have my next episode coming out on Monday, just recapping everything that happened during the college football season. My older brother is actually the wide receivers coach at Coastal Carolina. So, yeah, we've been texting back and forth all day today. He said he's probably not going to be able to sleep tonight just because they're so excited. So I'm excited to watch that game this weekend. But you guys can follow me on Twitter at JReidNFL. That's at JREID NFL. I am not the former Washington football team tight end.
I didn't want to bring it up, so I'm glad you did.
I got readers asking me. I said I'm not asking that question, man. But thank you for saying it.
That's a running joke I get a lot, but I just laugh about it just because every time he makes a play in a game or he makes a touchdown or if he makes a bad play, my mentions go crazy. So I know exactly what's going on with him week in and week out. But like I said, you guys can follow me on Twitter. You can find my work on thedraftnetwork.com. We have a whole bunch of things going up every single day. And if you guys ever want to put yourself in the shoes of the general manager, we have a mock draft simulator over there to where you can simulate all 7 rounds of the draft. We have over 500 scouting reports on some guys that you are familiar with and then some deep sleepers or players later on in the draft that you may not be familiar with. So if you ever want to put yourself in the shoes of the general manager of the Washington football team, we have the mock draft simulator of where you can do that and you can simulate the entire draft as well.
Jordan, before you go, I'd have to be remiss if I went from my readers of the Burgundy and Gold Report. We sat down with Kyle Duggar last year from Lenore Ryan, this time November. A lot of people had him in the 152 range. We just fell in love with him. We fell in love with his tape. And, we saw where he ended up, just a similar situation like Darius Leonard that we talked to the year before. Who do you think is that guy this year from the small school level?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I know it's a hard one, man.
There's a lot.
I got to ask you, though.
You put me on the spot with this one. So I'll give you a deep sleeper, and I actually talked to him last week. His name is David Moore. He's an offensive lineman from Grambling.
Okay, great.
He was one of the first players that accepted his invitation to the Senior Bowl. A lot of people don't really know him. Right now, he's about 6'2". He's about 305 pounds, but he has that dog mentality that you're looking for, and I think he's a player that's really going to blow up at the Senior Bowl. And just talking to him, he's so excited about the opportunity. And like I said, he's a small school player. A lot of people don't really know him about that, but it meant a lot to him for him to be the first player, well, one of the first players to get a Senior Bowl invitation. And a lot of people didn't even notice that he was one of the first players to accept his Senior Bowl invitation. So keep an eye on David Moore.
I did. I've been with. I did. As soon as they made the announcement, I was excited.
He's a good player.
With McWilliams last year from Grambling. I think the HBCU level deserves as much attention as we can give it, and I really thank you for coming on and really, enlighten our Washington fans and anybody who wants to get into this. I think you're a great follow and a great read.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys.
And Grayson McCall, my quarterback to watch. Coastal Carolina going at it with Zach Wilson this weekend, so stay tuned for that. Jordan, pleasure chatting with you. I'm sure we'll definitely do some work in the future. Come draft time, like you said, use the Draft Network for all your mock drafts. Me and Adam had Gibson and AGG going to Washington back in March on the mock drafts that we use. So great system. Love the Draft Network.
Love it.
Everything we do draft-wise, we go through y'all. So, Jordan, appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you guys for having me. It was a pleasure.